The world of video games is so varied. It requires so many different expertise to have that final product. We are dealing with animators, with writers, visual designers, and of course, with composition. This week, we are talking to Christopher Tin, the first composer to win a Grammy for his work in video games, really bringing that big orchestral sound to the video game world and lending a lot of credence to the art form. He's here joining us today. Christopher, thank you so much for joining the program.
It's my pleasure, Andy.
Just to set the stage, what would players, people that play games, really know you for, some of the work you've done?
Probably my best-known piece is a song called Baba Yetu, which is the theme song to Civilization 4. Came out about 10 years ago in 2005, late 2005. And it's probably best known also because it gained a lot of popularity outside of video game music as well. Certainly it had its origins as the theme for Civilization 4, but it quickly became a modern choral standard. A lot of choirs around the world sing it, just completely detached from its video game roots. And that song is probably what most people would know me by.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you are involved with the new big game that is coming out this week, Civilization 6.
Yes, I've returned to Civilization 6, and I've written a new theme song for the game. The song is called Sogno Di Volare, and it is a setting of Da Vinci's writings on flying. So I took a very famous quote of his, which goes something like, "Once you have flown, you will always look at the sky because that is where your home is and that is where you'll long to return." And as a little Easter egg for Civilization players out there, that's actually a quote that appears in the game Civilization 4 when you discover flight. And so I took that quote, had it recast into modern Italian, and then used that as the lyrics for the new theme song for Civilization 6.
So absolutely fascinating. I am going to hand you over to my colleague, Frederic Limon. He is a composer in his own right and really just kind of joins us on the program when we need to talk about music. He has his soundtrack reviews that we talk about here. Frederic, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Christopher. I'm excited to talk about music a bit.
Yeah, let's talk shop.
One thing that I found interesting, I'm going to tie Baba Yetu to Sogno Di Volare in a second. I remember seeing an interview where he talked about how it took you a week to come up with that main first melody. Da 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 da. And that's so striking compared to, you had mentioned how, and it's true, how the home screen music really plays an impact in people's experience when they play video game. I'm thinking like the Mass Effect intro or the intro to The Last of Us, just very iconic things. And what stood out to me from Baba Yetu was just how melodic it was. And now with Sogno Di Volare, which is, I love what you put together there. I noticed it's more of it starts off more as a texture. So I was wondering if there was anything deliberate or any decision making there where you decided you wanted to stay off something as iconic right in the first few bars and create something more of an overarching theme.
Actually, that's a really great observation, Frederic, I have to say, because originally Sogno Di Volare was about 8 bars shorter at the beginning. It just launched right into the main theme. But when I wrote it and I recorded it and I put it up against an image of the opening menu screen, I just tried to get a sense of the pacing of what was going on and just how it would feel to launch the game for the first time. And Sogno Di Volare, it really comes rushing at you very quickly. I mean, as a piece goes, it gets very rhythmic, very fast. Baba Yetu sort of eases you into it. It's a more maybe sort of spiritual and subdued experience. Sogno Di Volare is very much a high-energy experience, and I felt like I needed just a moment of pause before hitting them with the main theme, and so I extended the intro just a little longer. And I'm really pleased that you noticed that was a deliberate thing that I did, because it at the end of the day, it's not just about writing a melody, it's also about setting the tone for the game experience as you hit that menu screen. And literally I would play the music, pretend like I was mousing around on the screen, selecting my civ, and just get a sense of how it felt, whether I felt like this was a time when the music needed to kick in, that sort of thing. So there is definitely a physical dimension, I think, of seeing how the music plays underneath your own physical actions when launching the game.
Wow. Yeah, I had, to be honest, part of me wondered if it was deliberate or if it was somewhat deliberate, but that really answers it. So you are creating an experience. That's really what you're doing at the end of the day, kind of making it sync with what the player is going to go through.
Yeah, you really want to do that because, this is going to be their experience, their first time hearing my music, and you want to present your music, and you want to support the game as best you can. So, I really did take as much time and put in as much effort as possible in sort of like mocking up what the experience of launching the game would first be like. And, I have to say that while I tried not to fixate too much on Baba Yetu, I was very much aware of sort of the history of Baba Yetu and how it resonated with a lot of fans and how that experience of booting up that music felt for a lot of people. Just, in the comments I've read over the years about how they boot up the game for the first time and then they listen to the music. I wanted to use that, I guess, as a goalpost. This is the sort of thing that I should try to achieve again. That sort of feeling of launching a game for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I love about Sogno Di Volare, I feel like it could equally be performed at a church or cathedral or a Hollywood, stage, some theater. It really plays a balance between something, I think you had mentioned medieval in a way, in the sense, but also sort of the symphonic modern feel. And was it difficult to maintain that nuance to keep it on the right track? It's such a complex track in a way that I really feel it could have gone off the rails at some points, but you kept it in like a perfect balance, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. I think it was there were specific creative challenges to composing it, I think. For one thing, unlike Baba Yetu, it's very much rooted in sort of a European Western musical tradition. And a lot of the devices that I used in Baba Yetu, which are things that we unconsciously sort of are familiar with in our Western appreciation of pop music, things like call and response choruses and driving drums and things like that are very sort of popular cultural musical experiences that Baba Yetu sort of plays on in a way. This is very much rooted in sort of a classical European system, tradition, really. And so there's no drums, there's no soloist. It's all sort of like a big like an oratorio choir, choral piece from a big oratorio or something like that. And it was, like a lot of the devices that I've used over the years, I couldn't really bring to this. So, there were some specific musical challenges, I'd say.
You had mentioned how you're basing it, so many of your songs and your tracks you base off of text, and I did note that English was your major, and you had mentioned in previous interviews how ideas or musical ideas come to you as a response to things, whether it be images or other things. Do you also feel or hear music when you read text? Is that something that happens?
I do sometimes hear and feel music when I read text, but it really depends on the text. There are a lot of texts that are very ambiguous, that don't give you a lot. There are a lot of texts that are not rhythmic at all, which don't suggest any sort of rhythm or melody. It's harder to work with those. But there are a lot of times when I come across a prayer or a fragment of a poem or something, and it's so evocative, and the sort of setting of it is so lyrical and so rhythmic that the music it does half the writing for you in a way. But you're right in that I do respond to a lot of different things. I think as a media composer or any sort of composer, you have to have a reactionary sort of reflex, I guess, to external stimuli. And that's how you write your music. You sort of respond to things that are thrown at you, whether they be visual cues or textual cues or even other fragments of music. And I think that's how I like to compose, and I think it's a very sort of a natural way of composing, especially if you're scoring, say, a video game.
Oh, exactly. I've even thinking, going back to the fact that it took you a week to put together those first several notes for the melody to Baba Yetu. I mean, as a musician, I've had experiences as well where I put something together, I feel like it's right, and then the morning after or in the middle of the night, I wake up and it's like, no, something's missing, right? And then you keep iterating until you feel it's ready. But then there's the part of you that always wonders, well, if I gave it another week, would I have uncovered something deeper inside of me, right? Where do you find that fine line where you decide, okay, this is my final product versus I feel like there's something more for me to give?
Well, in the case of Sogno Di Volare and a lot of other pieces I've written in the last few years, frankly, I just run out of time. I mean, I have deadlines and I have to deliver these pieces at a certain time. And as much as I would love to pore over them and refine and refine and refine, I just don't have that luxury like I used to. I mean, I often say that I spent an entire week, writing the opening 4 bars of Baba Yetu. And that's absolutely true because I threw out draft after draft after draft, and I just was not happy with what I did, and I just kept reiterating until finally at the end of the week, something that I was really happy with came to me. Back then, I was at the beginning of my career. I mean, Baba Yetu was the very first piece of music I ever wrote for a video game, and I had the luxury of time back then. Now, not so much. For this particular theme song, I had about 3.5 weeks from when I got the artwork and the opening movie to when I had to deliver the final composed, orchestrated, recorded, and mixed product, which is not a lot of time. And I'll be honest with you, the first week or so, I wrote a completely different piece that just was not doing it and was just suffering. And it was a setting, actually, of Article 1 of the United Nations Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights. But it just wasn't working. It just was not exciting to anyone. And I scrapped it. So that was, a week gone right there. So, I mean, I feel like at a certain point, you're never really completely 100% satisfied with what you've done. You just sort of have to move on for it. And I think what actually winds up happening is you get more and more comfortable moving on from things and sort of embracing that, yeah, you made this creative decision when you could have made this other creative decision. But in all likelihood, this idea is just as good as the other ideas, and you're splitting hairs at some point. So I think it's worth keeping perspective on these sorts of things. Like the end listener doesn't know that this note could have gone up as opposed to going down, right? These are just sort of things that you drive yourself crazy with as a composer that have no real bearing on the finished product that the listener experiences. So I think, letting go is a bit of a healthy attitude to take.
That sounds like life advice.
I know, right? Somebody should write a song about that.
Yeah.
Let it go. That might do well.
Yeah, to transcribe it from what you just said and then make the lyrics, I think.
Yeah, right? There you go.
Yeah, melody's coming to my head.
Oh,
so keeping that in mind, from something that I experience when I'm composing, I'm wondering if this happens to you. Say you get the first several notes down. Okay, great. And so usually that makes everything else flow much more quickly, much more easily. I'll notice that certain images or memories come to my mind, and sometimes that informs how I put together the rest of the song. And I'm wondering, in the case of Baba Yetu or Sogno Di Volare, if once you got the initial hurdle over of how is this going to go, did specific images or memories come to your mind that may have informed, or just were overall themes in the back of your head as you put this together?
I think that in the case of both Baba Yetu and Sogno Di Volare, the development of the pieces didn't really come from sort of emotional memories for me as much as they came from sort of, I guess, mathematics and architecture and structure and this sense of sort of song form and needing to develop things and move things in different ways to keep the flow of the song shifting and evolving and constantly surprising the listener. So I think for me, if personal life experience and emotion ever comes into play, it usually comes in when I'm crafting the main theme, so picking the main notes and things like that. That's when really the sort of all the emotional recall, as actors would say, right? That's when that process happens. But once you establish your main theme, for me anyway, developing the piece becomes more a matter of relying on my training as a composer, and all the devices that you learn, the bag of tricks that you have in terms of orchestral devices and modulation devices and things to keep the song moving forward. Like I have various guidelines that I post for myself when I'm writing a piece. I never feel like, I always want to make the listener feel like they're being surprised by something on sort of a continual basis, right? So a lot of my music modulates quite a bit. I shift keys. Sometimes I do it in prepared ways so that the listener can sort of, follow along with the modulation and be taken by the hand to this new key. Sometimes I like to surprise the listener and just spring a new key on them. I mean, sometimes I'll take a chord that's in major and suddenly shift it to minor, and that takes us to a new key. So once I get into sort of, I guess, the development phase of composing, then it really becomes, relying on your bag of tricks and your training as a composer and your understanding of song form and just this sort of like vetting process that you do with the piece to make sure that it never stagnates and that the listener never feels like they're smarter than the piece and knows exactly what's going to happen before it happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in a way, when I'm listening to your music, I'm experiencing your love for mathematics, structure, text, song form, and the desire to surprise.
I think that's a fair assessment, yeah.
And something that you had mentioned earlier was that sometimes when composing for video games, there are technical limitations, of course, especially earlier on, literally years ago versus now. Were there any technical limitations where you had put something together, you were happy with it, but then were challenged by technical difficulties or limitations?
I don't think in any game that I've ever scored, I've been handcuffed by any sort of technical limitation. I think game audio engines are sophisticated enough where you can do a lot with them in terms of an interactive element. And I've never really felt like my creativity was stifled at all by any sort of technical limitation. That said, for Civilizations 4 and 6, I was essentially writing the most sort of like independent pieces of music that exist in those games. The main menu theme can sit as a piece of music and not be tied into any on-screen action or any gameplay or anything interactive, right? So for both of those games, I was given this section of the game where I could just write a piece and not worry about the technical side of things. Instead, I could worry about the emotional side of things and what a player feels when they first boot up the game for the first time.
Again, speaking with Christopher Tin, the composer working on Civilization 6, some of his great songs that you heard before, Baba Yetu, and of course, the new song that he's composed for this new game just out this week. Christopher, when I'm thinking of the world of video games, so often they're maligned and denigrated as just not real full experiences, real games, things that you play, flashy lights, not a lot of depth there. What do you think your work does in legitimizing what these games kind of offer. And, do you compare your work to some of the other work you've done? What makes video game composition that much more special?
Well, a video game composition is special in that, if you think about it, it's the only real interactive form of mass market music being written out there. So, I mean, that in itself is a very unique thing. As to whether there is a stigma attached to video games, I would say in certain circles there still is, but in terms of the general public, I think video games are highly regarded artistically. I may be wrong. This is just one person's experience, but I've never really sort of experienced that stigma attached to the work that I do in video games. Now, that said, I also do a lot of work in the classical music world. And in that world, this idea that a piece of music can be legitimate and come from a video game is still a new concept to them. There are video game-themed concerts, of course, and they tend to be lumped in with pop concerts and film music nights and things like that. But the idea that a piece of video game music can make the jump into the traditionally conservative classical world is still in development. It's not quite there yet, and I'm not sure that we're going to be there anytime soon either. Because if you think about it, film music has been around for ages, and yet, outside of a couple of Prokofiev scores for Sergei Eisenstein films, we still don't get film music in concert, in sort of quote unquote serious classical music masterwork concerts. So, that is, however, one very conservative sector of music. I think outside of that, video games are embraced as important and vital of a cultural phenomenon as film and TV is. And I think a lot of people have sort of let go of this idea that games are blips and bloops and whatever, that you think about people's preconceptions of video game music being. I mean, people know games are fully fleshed out virtual worlds with immersive and gorgeous soundtracks. So I think we're at a pretty good spot now.
Good to hear. Thank you so much, Christopher Tin, for his work on Civilization 6. And, of course, you can check out this game. It is available now. You can hear some of these incredible scores that he's been working on. Thank you again, Christopher. Fred, I know you had one final question for our guest before he hits the road.
Absolutely. So one thing that I find fascinating as a musician is that there are very few times where you experience a peak sensation of, some people call it resonance, some people call it a spiritual experience, something where, or even in psychology terms, a state of flow, where it's like their peak experience as a musician, where it's at a certain moment than when they were performing live or when they were composing something. And in talking to my friends that are musicians, they could count on one hand where, these were the few times in my life where it was a peak experience that I had as a musician. And I was wondering, given that context, if there are any peak experiences for you that come to mind in your life that you would point and say, there I felt something that, like, I experienced something that I could have only experienced doing music.
Yeah. That's a really good question, Frederic, and I'd never been asked that before, but yes, there were definitely experiences where something came to me and I thought, this is it, I've unlocked it. Baba Yetu was one such experience. When I finally hit upon that theme, that was a bit of a revelation for me. I have a piece called Woloyo Yamoni, which is the final track on my second album, The Drop That Contained the Sea. And in the final 2 minutes of that piece, I figured out how to combine the two main motifs from, the rest of the piece into one big chorus, and that was a revelation for me as well. I think Sogno Di Volare, I'd say a smaller revelatory moment, but late at night I was improvising at the piano, and suddenly I played out that theme, a variation of that theme. I mean, your initial ideas aren't perfect often, and they need refinement. But moments like that, they tend to be clustered around the experience of writing a melody, because sometimes a melody hits and you realize it's just exactly the way it needs to be, and that's just a great feeling.
That is great. Thank you.
Big thanks again, Christopher Tin, for joining the show. Andy Burkowski, Frederic Limon here, VGS Talk Radio, AM 640.